The Elder Scrolls Online has been in the news recently, specifically with a new IGN article celebrating the game's 10-year anniversary and reviewing just how far the game has come in those 10 years. But this got me thinking about ESO in 2024, including the new features that were added to the game this year and the additional features that we know are still coming. But according to this IGN article, there might actually be something else on the way that wasn't listed on the game's 2024 roadmap, which we'll talk about in this video. But so far, I think this year has actually been pretty good for the Elder Scrolls Online. Back in April, for example, we had the release of Update 41 and the Scions of Athelia DLC, which included 2 brand new dungeons, which were pretty enjoyable, that being Oathsworn Pit and Bedlam Vale. The Update 41 base game patch was also a solid entry with some major combat improvements, such as improved taunting for tanks, plus a huge buff to status effects, giving them greater priority and usefulness in ESO's combat system. Then in June, we had the release of the massive Gold Road chapter, with one of my favorite new features actually being added to the game. That's, of course, the new scribing system, which lets us players customize a variety of new skills from lots of different skill lines, including weapon skills, guild skills, soul magic, and more. Basically, what scribing did was it gave us thousands of unique skill combinations to better flesh out our builds or to fill in gaps where a particular class or setup might be missing something. Plus, these skills are just plain fun to use. I mean, I was able to expand on my two-handed barbarian build, which uses 0 class skills and focuses entirely on the two-hander as a main weapon. So now, using the new two-handed ability called Smash, I can scribe additional self-healing and buffs for myself to make the build even more effective and really fulfill that role I had in mind all along as this reckless barbarian / warrior using nothing but the two-hander, which feels awesome and honestly plays like a completely different class. Now, having played with scribing for months now, I can definitely say that this new system is a step in the right direction for ESO, and it's going to add a ton of life to the game moving forward because it's one of those systems that the dev team can continue to expand on over time. I mean, you can think of this as similar to housing or the antiquities system, where new things can get added every year to give us players even more options. So while it's not meta shifting or game breaking like a lot of players were worried about initially, it does give us the ability to really customize how our character engages in combat and progresses, which I am all for. But now you might be wondering what is next for ESO in 2024 and potentially beyond, and that's where we get into this new IGN article that I mentioned earlier. First up, we know Update 43 is nearly here. It's another free base game update that everybody can take advantage of. All the new features are known to us right now as they've been available for testing on the PTS for about a month or so. A few things worth mentioning in this patch is the new home tours feature. Basically, players can view recommended homes, they can mark favorites for revisiting, you can list your own home for touring, and then you can just browse through a list of the publicly visible homes. In addition to this is a big update for Endless Archive. This is going to add 2 new arena types, 10 new bosses, 2 new marauder types, plus new class sets, which actually look pretty decent for players that want to mix up their builds. But that brings us to the future and the final patch for 2024, which is scheduled for the 4th quarter of the year, so typically around November or so. And now we do have some vague information on this update so far, thanks to ESO's roadmap. We know, for example, that it will feature something new for PvP, as well as 2 new companions. Now, the companions piece here is really interesting because typically, companions come as part of whatever chapter zone gets added during that same year. So, in other words, you need to buy the chapter to get access to the companions. Now, since these companions are coming after the chapter release, it's still up in the air whether these 2 new additions will only be available to players who purchase Gold Road, or another more interesting option in my view, will they be available to everyone? In other words, could they be added for free to the base game? The ESO has never added any companions as a base game feature yet, and it does make me wonder why they were delayed until the end of the year to begin with. Were these 2 new companions scheduled to arrive with the Gold Road chapter and just got delayed because maybe scribing was keeping the developers too busy at that time? Or were they really scheduled now as part of something else? Is there something special maybe about this next set of 2 companions? Now, the IGN article didn't give us any further details here, but I think we can speculate, especially because it is the 10-year anniversary of ESO this year, that these 2 new companions might actually be different. Personally, I'd love to see us be able to take characters from ESO's main storyline, characters like Lyris or even Cadwell, for example, and bring them along with us as full companions. It does make sense that after 10 years, the classic ESO base game story might actually see an update here, and that those 2 new companions might be a part of that story update. After all, Quarter 4 is typically where we would see a quote story DLC drop, as they've usually done this in the past, but instead of maybe a new area, they just add on to that existing base game story instead. Now, the other known component of this update for Quarter 4 is that quote PvP feature that's also scheduled to arrive. Now again, we don't really know anything about this yet, so your guess is as good as mine here. My only thought again is that the dev team may try to tie this into that 10-year anniversary, and since Cyrodiil plays such a big part of the classic ESO story, that it might be some type of update to Cyrodiil or alternate form of Cyrodiil fighting. But regardless, I'm really excited to see where they go with the PvP update and what approach they take, because PvP updates are long overdue for the Elder Scrolls Online. But this is where we get to that new feature which I mentioned earlier, which has not been discussed until now. This might not even come out this year necessarily, but it sounds like it is being worked on currently and will be added to the game soon. So during the IGN article, they interviewed Rich Lambert, and he had this to say specifically. Lambert mentions that there are plans to improve the experience for new or returning players. Quote, as a new player or someone coming back after a year, it can become overwhelming, he admits. So we're working on some systems to make that kind of experience better. Not necessarily hand-holdy, but more informational. So yeah, very interesting quote there by Rich, which was surprising to me, but I guess makes sense. ESO has always had a big influx of new players every year because, now let's be honest, the game is great at marketing and great at making new content that's attractive, with the Elder Scrolls brand being a huge help, I'm sure. But those new players can easily get lost in ESO's massive game world, dozens of expansions, and all of its many systems. So first off, he says that they're working on some new systems to make that experience better. Systems being plural there, so more than one. And this may be a multi-pronged approach. Also, these won't hold the player's hands, but be more information focused. So it's hard to say what that even means, but I think I could definitely see some more in-game tutorial information being useful that actually teaches players how to play the game, and especially on the combat and group mechanics side, where many players get stuck and have trouble breaking out of overland and solo content. I mean, I have talked many times about how basic the in-game combat tutorial is for ESO, how it's not super helpful, plus there actually is no group combat tutorial which would review things for those new players, like how to heal, how to tank, how to do DPS, and so on. So something along those lines where they weave in more actual tutorials or maybe practice environments for content, like a practice dungeon or a practice trial where you can maybe join with some NPC players or companions first to get your footing before grouping with real players. That just might be something that they're looking at moving towards. But let me know what you guys think about all of this in the comments section below. What type of companions do you think we'll see in the next update? What about that new PvP feature? And also, what do you think would be the biggest help for new players who might be struggling with ESO for the first time? So sound off in the comments section below, and as always, thanks for watching. Hope you're doing well, stay safe out there, and I will see you around in the next video. Hey everybody, just a quick note that we are still rolling out our members-only builds and guides right here on YouTube, where members of our Tier 2 Elite Squad get access to unique off-meta builds like our no-class skills Barbarian build, focused entirely on two-handed abilities, no class skills at all, so you can literally play this on any class you want, and it feels like a completely unique playstyle. We've now updated the build for scribing to take advantage of the new two-handed ability called Smash, which makes this build even more fun to play and insanely powerful, because you basically now have an AoE cleave-based spammable that does more damage than Brawler, but can also heal you back for each enemy that you hit, and either buff yourself or debuff those enemies. This is just one of dozens of members-only builds and guides you can unlock when you decide to support the channel as a Tier 2 member, not to mention early access to videos, members-only Discord, and a lot more. So if that sounds good to you, just click on that join button down below or our members page link down in the description to get started, and thanks again for watching.